Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and the Ranking Member Deutsch, and the distinguished members of the committee, and I thank you again for inviting me here today to testify on today's very important hearing. As the United States has struggled to define its Syria policy over the past 2 years, the Syrian war has metastasized, regrettably, along very predictable lines. The debate in Washington about U.S. policy has been largely framed in terms of either staying out of the conflict or an Iraq-style intervention. Before we discuss specific tactics, I suggest that we should start by asking, what are strategic goals in Syria? The primary problem with Washington's current policy is not that it has been too reluctant to get involved, it's been that it's reading the strategic map incorrectly. As it stands today, Syria is effectively divided. The rebels are in control of much of the north and the east, with some regime pockets in those areas. And the regime, meanwhile, controls the coastal mountains in the northwest, much of the central city of Homs, and most of the capital of Damascus. Recently, the regime, with direct support from Iran and Hezbollah, launched a campaign to secure the corridor from Homs to Damascus and recapture the strategic town of Al-Qusayr on the Lebanese border. News this morning actually is that the town has fallen in their hands. The plan is of consolidating the regime in a reduced but clearly defined enclave. And this is Assad's plan B in Syria, but it's also Iran's plan B in Syria. Iran has signaled very clearly that it considers the toppling of the Assad regime to be a red line that it will spare no expense to prevent from happening. Therefore, to safeguard its core interest, Iran seeks to ensure the regime's continuity in a reinforced canton, with access to the Mediterranean and territorial contiguity with Tehran's subsidiary in Lebanon, Hezbollah. This explains the battle for Al-Qusayr. As you can see on the map, the town lies across the border from Hezbollah's stronghold in northeastern Lebanon. Securing Al-Qusayr aims to protect the corridor along Lebanon's eastern border, down to Damascus, and also secures the land bridge from the Syrian ports on the Mediterranean, as well as from the Damascus airport further south, and to ensure supplies to Hezbollah-controlled territory in the Bekaa. This enclave is a vital island of influence for the IRGC on the Mediterranean, adjoined and flanked by Hezbollah in Lebanon. In effect, this is what the Assad regime today is, an IRGC protectorate. Assad is reliant on the Iranians for funds, arms, hardware, and personnel. Hezbollah is spearheading operations on various fronts, and other Iranian assets from the pro-Iranian Iraqi militias are as well deployed in Damascus and elsewhere. Iran views the battle for Syria in strategic terms. Unfortunately, current US policy does not, and that's the problem. More than 2 years after the Syrian uprising, US policy remains unclear. What is our primary interest in Syria? Do we want to see the Assad regime toppled or not? Washington's position is ambiguous. If the regime in Tehran is indeed our principal foe, and I submit that it is, then US policy should proceed from this basic starting point. We should begin by clearly and credibly defining the goal of US policy to be the removal not just of Assad personally, but of his regime. US policy should explicitly state that the maintenance of the structures of Iranian influence in Syria is antithetical to US interests. Currently, the policy seems more focused on the fate of Assad himself, but that misses the larger strategic context. Worse still, the perception in Damascus is that, in contrast with Iran's commitment to the survival of the regime, the US lacks such commitment and such strategic clarity. The current US posture is not cost-free, both on the moral and strategic levels. Aside from the horrific toll in human lives, the policy as it stands now is on course to preside over the division of Syria into an IRGC island in possession of chemical weapons and advanced Russian strategic weapons system in one part of the country and a patchwork of militias in the rest. US must now devise a twofold strategy, prioritizing the threat to be, first, to break the Iranian archipelago of influence in the Mediterranean. To deny the Iranian victory, the US must target the avenues of Iranian support to the Syrian regime. That would mean striking the Damascus airport and various airfields in western Syria, using standoff weapons if necessary to achieve these results. In tandem with this measure, US should exercise leadership, bringing together allies that have been eager from the beginning for more robust action, and use their resources and their intelligence channels to various rebel groups using a two-pronged approach, one on the border with Turkey in the north, using Turkey's excellent relations with some of the rebel groups fighting there, and similar policy in Jordan in the south. To conclude, openly stating that handing Iran a strategic defeat in Syria is the priority for the U.S. is where it must all start. Exercising credible U.S. leadership to rally already eager allies around that stated objective should follow, and the rest will flow from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Badran.